And what we're doing with fertility awareness methods are tracking things like cervical fluid, our basal body temperature, which is our waking temperature in the morning. Some folks track their cervix position. With some methods, you might do all of those. You might do just one of those, two of those. With other methods, you might be using hormonal test strips like ovulation strips and other forms of hormonal testing.
Welcome to the Vibrantly You podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Martineau,
Caitlin Cipriano. In this podcast, we talk about fitness and nutrition on your motherhood journey. Whether you're trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or beyond, you're welcome here.
Nothing is off limits, and our goal is to support you in this important season of life so that you can feel vibrantly you. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. Please see the show notes for more details. Welcome back to the Vibrantly You podcast. Today, we are thrilled to introduce you to our very first guest on the show to talk to us all about the Fertility Awareness Methods, also known as FAMs, Brandy Oswald-Byrne. Brandy is a certified fertility awareness educator, menstrual cycle educator, and owner of Sauvage Wellness. She teaches women all around the world how to use fertility awareness methods of cycle tracking as a natural birth control to get pregnant when they're ready and to have better periods. She has over 10 years of experience with fertility awareness methods, including clients in 6+ countries across 3 continents. And none of her clients have gotten pregnant after working with her unless they wanted to. So Brandy, to start us off, tell us what brought you into this line of work and your journey to becoming a FAM educator.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you all in this capacity. My journey to fertility awareness methods is much like anyone else's, honestly, who I tend to work with. It starts as rooted in issues with hormonal birth control and not feeling like they were a good fit for me, but also feeling like there were no other options. And so much like folks of our generation, like we didn't grow up learning about cycle tracking methods of birth control, that they even existed or that there was any efficacy in them. And so when I became sexually active around age 18, 19, like anyone else, I just went to the gynecologist and got on the pill. And to date myself, I'm 35, so no one was getting IUDs back then. So it was just like, if you're having sex, you're going on the pill. That's just like what we're doing. And so that's what I did. And almost immediately, I started having anxiety attacks, which I had never had before. And then within 2 months, I had my first yeast infection. And in the 3.5 years that I was on hormonal birth control, I switched from different types of pills. I tried the vaginal ring. Back then it was just the NuvaRing, but now there's other options. Like I said, IUDs weren't really a thing. They wouldn't have been a good fit given the issues I was having anyways. But in all of that time, I went on to have daily anxiety attacks and 40+ yeast infections in 3.5 years.
Wow.
Right after becoming sexually active, to the point where like it totally knocked down my self-confidence. It hindered like having a positive relationship with sex and intimacy. And when I was going through the gamut, I was told a lot of wild things like stop wearing leggings. You have to blow dry your vagina after you shower. And I lived in a dorm. Like, how am I, like standing up in a public bathroom? Like, that's not going to work. One very condescending male OB told me to stop having sex with so many different partners without knowing that I was in a long-term committed relationship, just like assumed that about my lifestyle. So a process of being like slut shamed and all of this stuff, and then asking doctors, what are my options? Like, all of this started when I went on birth control, and I feel like this is at the root of this, and just hearing over and over again that hormonal birth control doesn't cause this. It doesn't cause mental health issues. It doesn't cause vaginal yeast infections. It doesn't cause these issues. You need to look elsewhere. And I did, and I was going to gastroenterologists. I spent thousands of dollars at alternative health providers trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And then eventually I was in a long-term committed relationship, talked with my partner, and was like, I just have to take this piece of the puzzle away and see if something gets better. And so I cold turkey went off the pill, and within 6 months, yeast infections were clearing up, anxiety was dialing down, and adding some nutritional and holistic support to that, things just continued to get better and better. And so I never looked back. But in that first year, I was just using condoms and like praying, right? I was like, I don't know what else we have here. Um, I got fitted for a diaphragm, and then was back then was told like they're not, you can't even order them in the US, which you can now, but this was 15 years ago or so. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's not an option. And I asked an OB, like, I've heard you can track your cycle. I'm in the yoga studio. I'm starting to become a yoga teacher. I'm with some like pretty crunchy Vermonters who are doing some funny things. And I've heard there are people out there just like tracking their body. And I was told, like, oh, you can do that to get pregnant, but like, do not do that as birth control. And I was like, okay, well, this lady's like 60 and she told me she did it for 30 years. Like, there's got to be something to this. And so anyways, they printed me out a whole bunch of info about how to get pregnant with cycle tracking, which is useless when you like, what am I going to do with that? And I just went home and started like the deep Googling and found back then, this was 2013, the Billings ovulation method was the most popular talked about method at the time. It's taught mainly out of Australia. So got myself a fertility awareness educator in Australia and had these crazy long distance sessions. She taught me how to use a cervical fluid only method, which now I use and teach cervical fluid and temperature method. But I still have the little sheet of paper with all my rules on it from way back then that I learned and used. And for a good 5 years, I just rocked and rolled on what this lady on the other side of the world taught me how to do. And then I started sharing a little bit with like friends what I was doing. I really kept it pretty hush for a while because stigma was very real. There were no cycle tracking apps back then. Like people were not talking about this. And people started to get curious and started to ask me, like, can you teach this to me? And I was like, not technically. So then I deep Googled again and found how you become a fertility awareness educator and got trained with the Natural Family Planning Teachers Association in the UK and started teaching other people that wanted to learn how to do this too.
That's really cool. I actually have like kind of similar experience to yours. We're, in the same age range as well, but I, went on birth control when I started having like a long-term, partner and around, 18,
Mhm.
19, and I didn't have all the yeast infections that you had, but I had other, issues with
Yeah.
mental health and weight gain and just not feeling like myself. And bounced around different types
Mhm.
of birth control and finally was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I don't feel good. And luckily, I have had the same partner for 12 plus years and we're married now, but he was really supportive. And I tried to figure out, I had no clue what I was doing. I was hoping, praying,
Yeah.
much like you were at the beginning, as well. But eventually, with the help of Google and stuff, kind of figured out more of the technical stuff. So, if someone is not familiar with the FAM method, can you explain what it is for our listeners?
Yeah, so one of the biggest misconceptions is that there is such a thing as the FAM method or the fertility awareness method. And that's important to know, especially for folks who are new to this process and trying to figure out getting started, because their fertility awareness methods are actually a class of cycle tracking methods. And there's a lot of different ones to choose from, and they have varying efficacy rates. And so, depending on which method you choose, the efficacy rates can be different and they kind of get all lumped together. If you're like on the Planned Parenthood website or something, this is a long story, but it says they're like 70% effective, which is not true at all. The method that I use and teach is 99.6% effective up to when you learn from a trained educator. But because we lump all of these methods together, including the rhythm method, which is like old and outdated and not even a fertility awareness method, but it gets lumped in, it like it skews the data. So the these cycle tracking methods fall under the category of fertility awareness methods. And what we're doing with fertility awareness methods are tracking things like cervical fluid, our basal body temperature, which is our waking temperature in the morning. Some folks track their cervix position. With some methods, you might do all of those. You might do just one of those, two of those. With other methods, you might be using hormonal test strips like ovulation strips and other forms of hormonal testing. Um, See if I'm forgetting any. Those are like the big ones that folks are doing. Symptohormonal, symptothermal, which is what I teach, cervical fluid only, temperature only. Those are the big ones. But we're tracking these really concrete signs of increasing and decreasing fertility in our cycle and applying researched rules to them to isolate when we can and can't get pregnant in each cycle.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the rhythm method gets lumped in there, and I almost feel like that's what people think this is when it's
Yeah.
actually way more complex, and there's so many other things to think about. And I know that you typically work with people one-on-one in your work. So when you are counseling people on this, what are things that you're teaching them or helping them track? Kind of, I mean, I know everyone's different and people have different goals too, whether they're trying to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy, but like in general, what are you typically counseling people on?
Yeah. Well, whether we're trying to get pregnant or trying to avoid pregnancy, we're all tracking the same things because we're all looking for the same information and then just acting differently based on our desires. So, with the symptothermal double check method, which is the method that I use and teach, I'm teaching folks how to track their daily cervical fluid secretions, which is really easy. It sounds complicated. It's literally go to the bathroom, look at your underwear, look at your toilet paper, maybe touch it. That's like all that we mean when we say check your cervical fluid. Um, and where folks are learning how to track their basal body temperature, which again is wake up, take your temperature. Um, there's some variance if we wake up early and late, but I teach folks how to work within that and still live like a modern and flexible lifestyle. There's even devices now that can take our temperature for us if we truly can't do an oral temp in the morning. So I'm teaching folks that. I also do teach folks how to check and track cervix position. That's a optional tracking tool that some folks really like. It becomes more important when we're postpartum or going through perimenopause, where cervical fluid changes can become a little bit more difficult to read. But it's not something like for myself, I maybe check my cervix 3 times a year. Like it's not something I do often. It's if I'm having a cycle where I need more verification. And then I'm counseling folks on how to apply the rules of the method to this data that they're collecting, because just tracking isn't a method. That's information. We have to apply rules to that information in order to isolate our fertile windows, in order to understand what's going on in our bodies. And so I do also help with counseling on if what we're seeing on the charts points to a potential hormonal or menstrual cycle imbalance. And we can see a lot of that on charts. We can see the early signs of thyroid conditions, of low or high estrogen, low progesterone, issues that could lead to irregular or delayed cycles, lots of things that can play into painful periods, heavy periods, PMS. We can see this all starting to play out on a cycle chart, which helps folks who are trying to conceive be able to seek out support earlier rather than just like waiting until they've had 6 to 12 months and a doctor is ready to help them with pharmaceutical procedures versus like a natural approach. And then also people who are suffering with uncomfortable periods or menstrual cycle symptoms, it helps us pinpoint what might be going on so they can take that information to their providers and seek out some tailored support. So it's not just birth control, pregnancy, it's also this diagnostic support tool for people who might be struggling within their menstrual cycle and fertility as well.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating too, like how many things you can figure out is going on in your body just by tracking your
Mhm.
cycle. It's really cool. And I think it's something people just don't know enough about.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of my favorite things is clients will often joke that I'm like a period wizard or a period witch because look at a chart and be like, throw some pads in your bag. Your period's coming later today or tomorrow. And they're like, how in the world? And then I get a message the next day like, you were right. And I'm like, well, I can see that from your chart that it's coming. I can also tell folks like, throw some pain relief in your purse because this period might be a little bit more difficult than the last one based on what we're seeing on your chart. Or like, have you ever had your thyroid tested? Because your chart's showing that like maybe it's time to take a look at that. And I'm not taking over the role of a doctor, but honestly helping get folks there sooner and like really advocate for the support that they or the testing that they are in need of.
Yeah, I like how you talked about all of these big things that I think tend to come up for individuals and how this can be used as a tool that is going to benefit them. So, if someone has never learned any of this stuff, they don't know how to track their cycle, what do you recommend that they do? And what are some maybe key things that they should be looking at or like anchor points that they should pay attention to?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if someone's first starting out and we're just like getting our bearings and they're not enrolled in say a course or something where they're going to learn everything from A to Z. First of all, any information they're learning is not information to be used as birth control or necessarily an effective pregnancy achievement tool. It's more just information to start taking a look at what's going on beneath the surface. And so I always start folks with cervical fluid, despite the fact that everyone wants to jump into taking their temperature. Everyone wants to temp. It's like the easy, concrete thing to do. And it's all these cool devices out there now. But temperature only tells us that we have ovulated after it has happened. We get pregnant from intercourse that happens before we ovulate, almost exclusively, because once we ovulate, the egg is only viable for conception for 12 to 24 hours. We can get pregnant from intercourse up to 5 days before that point. So, temperature is great to let us know, cool, I definitely did ovulate. My fertile window's closed. I can ride out the rest of the cycle. Does not tell us anything about when we're going to ovulate, when we're entering our fertile window, and kind of how that process is going, which is important both for fertility, for pregnancy achievement, and for birth control. And so I always start folks with cervical fluid. And it's as easy as when you go to the bathroom, just take a look. What do you notice on your underwear? What do you notice on the toilet paper? And write it down or put it in the notes on your phone with the day labeled and just start to see some trends. Because as you start to track, even in this slightly more concrete way, you will start to see that the bulk of your cervical fluid is made at a really specific time in the cycle. It's about this 8 to 10 day span of time. And outside of that, we're not really making much cervical fluid. So when tracking cervical fluid feels daunting, if we do it in this way, we can see, oh my God, it's really like just this blip of time when my body's trying to ovulate, and then not much else is happening around that. And then from there, temping is nice to add in to say, oh my God, yeah, after that's happening or towards the end of that, I am seeing this shift into higher temperatures. I'm like starting to understand how ovulation works, how my body is sending me signals that it's happening or going to happen or has happened. And I think that helps people demystify this a little bit and to feel like, oh, it is all right there. And now that I know that, let's learn the rules and like make this into something more concrete.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Um, I feel like I already know the answer to this, but Some people like to get started with apps or using something like Natural Cycle, or like you said, what's that thing that people put on their arm?
The
Temp drop.
temp drop.
What is your advice for people? Is it better to start with one of these apps as they're trying to get the hang of it, or would you prefer that they do like pen and paper?
Yeah. I love that you were like, I already know the answer because Meg does know me. And I will come right out and say, I am a cycle tracking app hater. And I just don't think the technology is there yet for us to be relying on these in any concrete way for birth control or pregnancy achievement. They're really great for opening up the conversation and for making menstrual cycles more mainstream. And I think that is incredible. And for allowing us to feel more agency and understanding over our cycles, but they do a disservice by allowing folks to think that they're more than that. And really, cycle tracking apps are really detailed notebooks. They're not birth control methods and they're not pregnancy achievement methods. And so, um, the big reason for that is because even if a cycle tracking app or fertility device like Natural Cycles allows you to enter information about your cervical fluid or your cervix position or any other symptoms, breast symptoms, ovulation pressure, it's not used as part of the algorithm that's outputting fertile and infertile days. Those algorithms are based on temperature readings, which, as we know, do not predict upcoming ovulation. They're based on past cycles. When did my temperature rise in the last cycle, and the X number of days before that would have been my fertile days. And then they're based on the cohort of studies of bodies that were studied to go into creating the algorithm. So my issue there is that we're predicting current cycle fertility based on past cycle data, temperature only, and other people's bodies. That's just like, why do it that way when there are these other methods that allow us to not predict, but to isolate current cycle fertility based on our bodies, current cycle information, and cervical fluid and temperature together. So I require that all my clients learn how to chart with pen and paper, and they but also have the opportunity to use any app that they would like as a notebook or storage for their information. The only app that is even approved for fertility awareness methods use by trained fertility awareness educators is called Read Your Body. You'll see if you go on, you'll see that I'm featured there as an educator in their directory, but I don't get any money for telling you that they're wonderful because they are. Um, the way that they work is like a notebook. You input all your data and it doesn't tell you today's fertile, today's infertile, red light, green light. It doesn't do any of that. It makes you choose the method you know how to use that you've learned someplace else, ideally from an educator. Then you have to apply your rules based on that method, and then it tells you your window's open, your window's closed, etc. So that if people do want to chart digitally, I have no problem with that. I just say go to Read Your Body, where you are required to have already learned how to use one of these methods. Cycle tracking apps outside of Read Your Body, they don't require us to learn anything or to know anything or to know the rules of a method. We're just tapping cute little buttons and then information appears in front of us.
Yeah, I was going to say that same thing. When you're using an app, you aren't actually learning. And
Yeah.
then if the app goes away, you're like, shit, am I fertile? Am I not? I don't know. Because if you're not learning those different signs to look for, and like you said before, like your fertile window, or you can get pregnant before you actually ovulate. So if you're not paying attention and say you're trying to avoid getting pregnant, because I always see people too that are like, oh, the natural way didn't work for me. I got pregnant. And a lot of times they
Stress
are
me out.
using yeah, and a lot of times they are using those apps. So it's like
Mhm.
might be user error. So
Yeah,
I do.
and also a big issue with apps that we don't talk about enough is privacy infringement. They can sell your data. And in a country where reproductive rights are becoming limiting, there's some big issues around that. They could sell your data to, or even hand over your data to courts, public officials, the medical system to we haven't necessarily seen it yet, but the potential is there. And so when you're charting on pen and paper, you safeguard your own personal health property. And it's health information so that we're putting on these apps. So it's important to safeguard that and to think about that when we're just entering willy-nilly what's going on.
Absolutely. And I do think it's like empowering to be able to learn how to do this on your own and kind of be in charge of your own data, your own
Yeah.
cycle. Like that's really
Then you can have
important.
a whole folder full of like hundreds of charts like I do right here to my right from like decades of tracking. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think, yeah, it's more empowering. You're not relying on an algorithm to tell you when things are going to happen. You're able to, again, learn, follow the rules, and understand your own individual unique trends and what's might be normal for you versus what might not be. And if someone is having things that feel maybe not normal for them, or they've maybe they're coming into trying to learn this type of education around their cycle and it's irregular. What are some things that that type of individual might be looking for if they're trying to like establish where they actually are in their cycle?
Yeah. The coolest thing for folks with irregular cycles is that they're looking for the same stuff. They're looking for fertile cervical fluid changes. They're looking for the biphasic temperature shift, which is the shift from low to consistently high temperatures through the end of the cycle. Um, the only thing that happens in irregular cycles, and when we say irregular cycles, what we're really talking about most usually are long cycles. It We're just seeing those signs happening later in a cycle. And in terms of cervical fluid, we might see multiple buildups before confirmed ovulation or before that sustained temperature rise. And that's just the body trying to ovulate, not quite getting there. So it tries again later. And it will make as many attempts as it needs until the tipping point happens and we spill over into ovulation. But folks with irregular cycles, it's the same coursework, it's the same education as everyone else. It's just a little bit more patience and less predictability. But the whole benefit of tracking with fertility awareness methods on a chart, not in an app, because those apps are going to predict based on past cycles. And if they're irregular, that's not reliable at all. Um, but it's that we're not actually predicting cycles. So having unpredictability in the cycle is not doesn't need to be a bad thing when we're using fertility awareness methods because we know what we're looking for. We don't need to know when to look for it.
I like that because I do feel like people start to panic when they have irregular cycles, like something's wrong with me, what do I do? Or like you said, looking at those apps and are like, oh, I was supposed to have my period now. Where is it? Like it can cause a lot of unnecessary anxiety. Whereas if people are learning the things that you teach and learning how to track different
Yeah.
signs, um, that will ease anxiety and I think just help with overall feelings of like, oh no, something's wrong with my body because that stress doesn't help anybody either. So, if someone has been on birth control, like any method of birth control for a long period of time, and they decide to come off and they want to get into this kind of tracking, I feel like there's often a myth. Maybe it's a myth. We'll see what you say. But I feel like there's a myth around like, oh, my period is going to be off or my cycle is going to be irregular. It's going to take so long for things to kind of even out. What have you seen in your years of doing this work? Is that true? Or, yeah, like kind of what have you seen there?
The majority of folks transitioning off of hormonal birth control, regardless of how long they've been on it, have cycles that come back pretty quickly. And that's within the first like 60 days. They reestablish ovulation. So I see that happening pretty often is that the cycles come back. It's a little bit more challenging on hormonal birth control methods that um, prevent ovulation from happening. So not all hormonal birth control methods work the same. So some of them prevent pregnancy by halting ovulation. You don't, however long you've been on them, you haven't been ovulating. Those are methods like the pill any, all the pills, the NuvaRing, the Depo shot, the Nexplanon, the arm implant. I don't think people use this much anymore, but the patch, I feel like I'm like dating myself going back through all of these, but those are ones that prevent pregnancy by and large by halting ovulation. As long as you're on them, you're not ovulating. Um, a lot of people don't know that because you're still bleeding, so that's confusing. Those bleeds are pharmaceutical or chemical bleeds. A real menstrual period happens because you really ovulated. So if you're not ovulating, you're not having a menstrual bleed, you're having a chemical bleed. Can still be good to flush out uterine tissue that's grown and et cetera, et cetera. But that's why those periods are different. They're not true menstrual periods. Um, those methods, it can take a little bit longer to reestablish ovulation because ovulation hasn't been happening. So the metaphor that I always use with clients is that it's like riding a bike. I used to be quite good at that, but now I'm 35 and haven't ridden a bike in roughly 25 years. In any regular sense, right? Not really that good at it, I can imagine. Um, and so it's going to take time. It's going to take practice. I'm not going to jump right into riding a bike and like go trail riding. It's the same way with our menstrual cycles. We might be ovulating, but we might not be very good at it. So it might be a little irregular, or the cycles might be on the shorter side or the longer side. They might be more painful or more heavy until our body relearns that process. It's going to be a little bit like puberty again, which is when the first time you established ovulation. And it might be even more difficult if you went on a hormonal birth control method that halts ovulation right after you started ovulating, let's say in your high school years, right? And a lot of us, that's been the story. So when we find ourselves in our 30s ready to start families and finally getting off hormonal birth control, it's like, why is ovulation either not here or so like weak and wonky and difficult? Why do my charts looks a little like lackluster? And it's because our body needs support. We've never really learned how to ovulate. Our body never got used to it. So I see cycles coming back, but sometimes not coming back in a really strong and vibrant way. And that's where we can see that on a chart. We can see that physically, and we can use that information to advocate with providers, usually in the holistic realm of things, for getting nutritional support, supplemental support, exercise support on how to revive ovulation. With methods like the hormonal IUD, where we don't really know what's happening. Some people continue to ovulate, some people don't ovulate at all. If you're getting a monthly predictable bleed on a hormonal IUD, you're very, very likely ovulating. But some folks can ovulate and not bleed because it also thins the uterine lining, so we're not flushing out and having a period as often. Some folks don't bleed and don't ovulate. We don't really know. So coming off the IUD is a little bit of a crapshoot. There's not a strong way to know. If it halted ovulation, we might see that same cascade play out. But for a lot of folks, if they're continuing to ovulate, they just kind of jump right back into it. Either way, all of those methods are impacting ovulation, and most people need a level of nutritional, supplemental, and lifestyle support, but their cycle is theirs. And that's the good news, because it's easier to support a cycle that's happening than it is to revive a cycle that's not happening.
So let's say we kind of take that same type
Yeah.
of person that you're talking about. Maybe they've been on birth control, teens, they're in their 30s now, and they're trying to conceive. Maybe they have been trying to conceive for 6 months plus. They're tracking ovulation, like doing all those things. What are you typically looking for, or what themes do you tend to see in these individuals that maybe they are overlooking or missing?
Yeah. One of the most common ones in today's world is signs of an underactive thyroid. And we see that through temperatures. And we see it like, I can see it on one chart. I don't need a huge number of charts to see that. I'm not diagnosing it. I'm saying, hey, your chart's showing signs of underactive thyroid. Time to go talk to your doctor and get a blood test. That alone, literally having underactive thyroid, can prevent someone from getting pregnant. It can also cause early miscarriage. So that is incredibly important if that's what's happening. So that's something that I look for right away. I also look for something called luteal phase defect, which is just the fancy term for a short luteal phase. And for those folks who don't know, your luteal phase is from ovulation to the start of your period. It's the later half of the cycle. And we think a lot about getting pregnant as sperm and egg meeting and ovulation. Like we're so focused on ovulation and getting the sperm to the egg. But that can happen. And if sperm and egg, when they combine, don't attach to the uterine lining, we won't get pregnant. So some people are very likely sperm and egg are meeting and they're achieving that part of the equation, but they don't have the optimal conditions for implantation, which is the later phase. And a big marker of that is having a short luteal phase, less than 10 days. So that's a big thing I look for. I also look for estrogen progesterone balance in the luteal phase, and that looks like looking at what temps are doing, what cervical fluid is doing. Often we'll see like a resurgence of wet type fluid and erratic or low temperatures after ovulation. So I can see that right on a chart as well. And then if their charts are just showing like heavy, long, painful periods, that's a really good sign of having hormonal imbalance with estrogen that can also impact things and can be underlying inflammation where even if the ovulation everything looks perfect, timing is perfect, if there's too much inflammation in our system we might struggle to conceive as well. So and that's where we can then seek out nutritional support, acupuncture, like all that stuff to help bring down. So I'm not necessarily healing the issue, but my job is helping to pinpoint what could be going on so we can actually seek out the solutions to what might be happening.
Yeah, I think all of those are so important. And I'm so glad that you asked that question, Caitlin, because I feel like, especially right now, like in the world we're in right now, like infertility or like suspected infertility is such, like it's rising, right? Like the rates are rising, but people don't even know to look for these things like the thyroid, like you said, the imbalance, the short luteal phase. And I know for myself, when I was trying to get pregnant with my daughter, my second child, I was not getting pregnant for quite a while, which was confusing to me because I was not coming off birth control. I got pregnant very quickly with my first, and I actually worked with Brandy for several months, and she actually did pinpoint that my thyroid was potentially underactive. I went to the doctor, got it tested, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, you will never get pregnant with these numbers." And I do think it's something like if we hadn't worked together and you hadn't been looking at my charts, I would have never known that, you know? Like it's just something that we're not taught at all. No one tells us about these things.
Yeah, and like how many people end up at IVF clinics because they didn't know and all we needed was to for a thyroid condition you take one little pill in the morning and like you're good. And then they can manage that throughout your pregnancy. So sometimes the solution, and same with like short luteal phase, that's really easy to fix. We support ovulation with a couple supplements and some nutritional shifts. And like within 3 cycles, people usually are tacking on the number of days that we need to lengthen out and rebalance that phase. So the solutions, when we know what's needed, are honestly quite simple. And I think sometimes as immensely valuable as fertility technology is, we're almost like leaning on it too hard, or the medical world is telling folks like we can't help you until you've gone 12 months of trying, right? And then the help that we can offer you are these procedural helps, the hormonal shots and things like that. But for that whole first year, that's where fertility awareness methods can be so helpful to keep us from needing that support. So then the folks who do truly, truly need to rely on it, it's there for them. But a lot of us, there are these other avenues we can pursue before getting there.
Yeah, and I know, again, even for myself, that those were conversations I was having with my doctor, like, oh, you can go on, whatever the medications are that make you like hyper ovulate and like
Yeah.
talking about all these other things
COVID. Yeah.
before we even looked at the thyroid. And 2 months of me being on the thyroid medication, I got pregnant. Like it was literally that simple. I know that's not the case for everybody, but imagine if that had been overlooked, and they never tested that when that was actually the issue. So I feel like we've covered some really incredible topics so far in this episode. But as we do start to just wrap things up, Brandy, what's one thing that you really wish everyone knew about their menstrual cycle?
That it doesn't have to be hard and it doesn't have to be confusing. I used to, like all of us, dread my period and feel like my menstrual cycle, and I was kind of taught this by the matriarchs in my life, is kind of just this like backhand curse, right? Like we just grin and bear it, keep it on the download, shove those pads up your sleeve, don't let anybody know it's happening. It's this like silent suffering of being a woman. And can I swear?
Yes, you can.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Okay. I could not love my menstrual cycle and my period any more than I do right now. It is, I used to struggle with like flooding heavy periods, like bleeding through multiple pads stuck together and my pants onto a chair. Painful cramps, like going to the hospital level cramps, and like hormonal cystic acne, like ridiculous period symptoms that I was told only hormonal birth control could solve. But once I started charting, I could spot like, holy crap, here's what's going on under the surface. Let's get the support I need. Um, when a menstrual cycle is really well understood and really well nourished, they're easy. They're short. They're 3 to 4 days long. They are relatively pain free. I haven't had a menstrual cramp in like a year. I mean, way longer than that. Um, they're short, easy, light. They don't throw your life off. When we know how to live in alignment with our cycles and really nourish this vital part of our body, they're easy. And I firmly believe that menstrual cycles are our superpower and not our curse. We just don't know how to use them. We're like in our villain origin story right now. We haven't tapped into how to use our superpower. And when we do, like that's the world I want to live in, where women and girls are like lit up on their menstrual cycle powers.
Mic drop.
Yeah, I would say I love that. I think it should feel like you know what's going on. You're able to be intuitive with your body and just have that deeper understanding. And so, if people have enjoyed this conversation and our listeners want to connect with you further, where can they find you and what type of services do you offer if they are looking for more support in any of this?
Yeah, so you can find me at my website, sauvagewellness.com, which I imagine you might share somewhere, SAUVAG. For folks who are wondering, that's the French word for wild. My academic background is in French studies. So you can find me on my website where there's a tons of free resources. I have a free guide both for tracking to conceive and tracking to avoid pregnancy. Um, I have a free mini cycle tracking course that's really great for people who are in that early learning process, just to gather those resources. And I have a weekly-ish newsletter that goes out. I am also a stay-at-home mom in many, many days of my life. So weekly-ish is the proper term for that. But that's full of free resources too. And then I do work with folks one-on-one through a 3-cycle course or drop-in sessions for folks who are trying to conceive and may already have some of this information, or folks who are trying to avoid and self-teaching through a resource guide like Sensi Plan or Taking Charge of Your Fertility. I offer drop-in sessions for those folks too. But if you've like never done anything, you have to start with a learning manual or a course because there's a foundational bit of information to know. But those are, and I do have an Instagram. I'm not posting right now, but there are lots of free resources there. But if you message me, don't expect to hear back because I'm off of the socials.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to drop all the links in the show notes so people can access that. But this was so amazing, Brandy. You are such a wealth of information. This was so helpful, and I really hope people listening today, have a lot of takeaways from this episode and connect with you if they want further information. And if you were listening to this episode and you found it really helpful, also be sure to share it with a friend. Because like Brandy said, our menstrual cycles are our superpowers and more women need to have this information. So be sure to share this episode and we will be back next week.